I hope, like the song says, also, not only have you woke up with your mind stayed on Jesus, but stayed on the Lord. We're grateful to be able to actually have yet another opportunity to experience not only the presence of God, but also an opportunity to experience with each other. We have been engaged in a discovery journey in discovering God's purpose as God's love bag. We began a couple of classes ago beginning to embark upon chapter 1, and we're going to continue that this morning. However, before we begin, we want to do two things. We want to first begin with a prayer, and then the next thing we want to do is we want to, again, put up on our screens the adjustments that we've made on our teams. And the next two classes that we assemble, we mentioned that we have two platforms that we have been working on to make sure that as a class we will be able to stay connected to each other, and also be able to keep pace with the class when we're not here, whether we're teaching or whether we're just out. So it's going to be important for us to do some technical things to get those platforms in place, so that as we go forward, that will be taken care of. But before we go any further, let's start with a prayer. And as we pray, let's remember to consider a couple of people who are a part of our class. Let's remember to pray for Sister Shanita Neal. She is still in the recovery process. It's good to see Brother Rangel with us on this morning. Let's continue to hold him up, lift him up in prayer. And see, there was one other person.
Bryant?
That is the person. Let's remember to keep in prayer our other discovery guy, Brother Brian. Went to the doctor last week, waiting on some results to come in, but let's keep him in our prayers. We want to ask that Brother Sands lead us in that prayer. However, I want you to know, I want to give a quick love deposit for Brother Deshaun Williams. Is he?
He's here.
Oh, he's right here. We've been blessed in this class to have our media person a part of the class. And as you know, notice he's been tightening up things in such a way, making this space as big as it is, making sure that it's adequate in terms of being able to communicate with each other effectively and teach appropriately. Let's give him a love deposit for helping us out. There are now two mics, handheld mics that we have access to, so when we begin to go in discussion, whether in this group format or at our tables, we now will be able to hear each other again and communicate more effectively. So we're going to ask that Brother Sands lead us in a prayer.
Let's go to God in prayer. Father in heaven, we come before you as always, giving thanks, God, for another day that we can work.
Can you hold that up to your mouth?
We pray, God, that as we come together, we'll continue to learn things that will add to our soul, our spirit, and also share one another the pertinent things that you have shown us in our personal life. Father, we come before you, Father, praying for individuals mentioned before, Brother Brian, Sister Neal, Thanksgiving, Father God, Brother Rangel. We pray, God, that you would continue to heal them in their bodies, connect them with the right doctors, Father, surround them with the right people that would continue to build them up and help them through the healing process. We pray, God, that as a unit, as a family, that we can get behind our family members to make sure that they fully understand that they are loved and supported by us. The most important reminder that they are loved and supported and taken care of by you. We say these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Now, the first order of business this morning we want to do, we're going to put the group names, the different groups, your names, and the individual members in your group. We want to ask everyone to take a moment to look up at the groups to make sure that you can identify your name and the group that you're in. It's good to see Sister Day this morning. She has been under the weather. We've been praying for Sister Day. Let's give her a lovely applause. Good to see her. God answer her prayer. So I'm going to leave that up just a couple of seconds, everybody. See your name, see the group that you're in. Okay? If I need to leave it up, if I need to go back to it, somebody just raise your hand, I'll go back to it. Here is the second set of groups. We eliminated one group, and now we've gone from 7 to 6. Okay? Okay? Everybody, take a look. Okay? All right. Now, these are discovery groups. These are discovery study groups that you will be engaged in. And I'm going to tell you, there is another piece that we're going to be introducing next week as well. You'll see the bulletin board there. That board, beginning next week, will, as you all know, all of our classes have the bulletin boards. And we will also begin with a bulletin board. It's going to become a discovery board. And the way it will work, it's going to be an interactive board. It's going to be an interactive board. We will actually, Sister Noreen White, I tasked her with the task of actually, I shared with her what we wanted to do. She came up with the exact right idea in terms of capturing the concept that we wanted. So we will have a discovery board, and we'll introduce that to her. She's going to be getting with her team this week and talking about actually illustrating next week what that board will entail from month to month. The way that's going to work is every month, one of the groups will actually be responsible for actually contributing to the board in actually sharing a discovery that you made within your group that month. And you will actually impose upon the board your discovery for the month. And so that's going to be how that board actually works from month to month. So be aware of that, and especially those who are in. Yes, you'll be changing. You'll be changing your discovery. That's what's going to be changed. That's what's going to be changed. All right. Okay. So be aware of that. Now, without any further ado, where we are right now, we are in chapter 1. Chapter 1 has to do with what is God's purpose. What is God's purpose? Again, every person have been asked to read chapter 1. And the assumption is that all of us have already read chapter 1. Chapter 1 begins by defining, giving the meaning and the definition of God's purpose. If you read chapter 1, what you would have read, the author mentions that God's purpose defined is God's original intent that he had when he created all creation, and the end result equals purpose. And he goes on to illustrate that in the 6 days of creation, there was a principle, a process that God did in terms of his creation. God would say, "Let there be light," and he saw it, and then it was good. So God said it, he saw it, and then it came to pass. God said it, he saw it, and then things came to pass. Now I want to introduce another concept that will also help us better understand this process that God used to establish purpose in anything. God said it, he'll say it, he'll see it, and then it comes to pass. But also, when he says a thing, that's the creation of a thing. We'll talk more about what that actually means. So when God says a thing, that's the creation. When he sees a thing, that's the formation. And then ultimately, there comes the next process of manifestation. God sees it, he says it, and then it becomes. In the seeing process is when he creates it, and then there comes a process of formation, and then ultimately there comes the idea of manifestation. That's how God's purpose ultimately begins and then comes into manifestation. Now, so he talked about that at the beginning of chapter 1. So what does this principle actually entails about God's purpose? When God says a thing, and when he says a thing and sees a thing, what does that really mean? It reveals something very interesting about what we need to know about the character of God. Oftentimes the Bible talks about we should understand or try to understand the ways of God. Well, what are the ways of God when it comes to his purpose and creation? One of the things that we need to understand about the ways of God is this. When it comes to purpose, we need to understand that God does not start something to finish it. God never starts something to finish it. God never starts something to finish a thing. That's not the ways of God. However, what God does do, God will always finish a thing, and then he goes ahead and starts it. That's really important. God always finishes before he starts. So when he starts a thing, God has already completed the process or the thing in which he desires to finish. So we need to understand that. Turn in your Bibles real quick to Isaiah chapter 46:10. God always finishes what he creates, and then he starts it. God always finishes what he creates, and then he starts it. We are a creation of God, by the way. And God has finished us before he started us. That's important for us to understand. Isaiah. Okay. Isaiah chapter 46, verse 10. Somebody has that in the Bible. What does it say?
Declaring the end from the beginning.
Isaiah says, declaring the end from the beginning. Read.
And from ancient times.
And from ancient times.
Things not yet done.
Things not yet done. Declaring the end from the beginning. In other words, what Isaiah is communicating is that God actually finishes a thing. He declares the end from the beginning. And the thing that we need to understand in regards to us is that when God said in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, a very familiar text of scripture, and we'll go into this in real detail later on in the book. But what we know already from familiarity is this, God said in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, he said, let us do what? Y'all don't know the verse?
Make man.
Okay, turn over to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. It says, God said, let us do what?
Make man.
Make man. Read. And then he said, let us make man how?
In our own image.
In our own what?
Image.
In our own image. And then in our what? Own image and in our own likeness. Let us make man in our own image and in our own likeness. Continue to read.
And let them have dominion.
And then, notice what he says here. Notice this very carefully. He says, let us make man in our own image and in our own likeness. And then he says, the next thing he says is what, brother?
And let them have dominion.
Then notice what he says. Notice what he says at first. He says, let us make man, right? In our own image and our own likeness. Everybody, you follow? Everybody track. But now notice what he changes in what he says. The next thing he says is let what?
Let them have dominion.
He says let us make man, and then he says let them have dominion. Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say let us have dominion. Speaking of himself, God, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus. But he did say, in the creation part, let us make man in our own image, after our own likeness. But then he says, let them, not us, have dominion over what?
Over the fish of the sea.
Over the fish of the sea,
And over the birds of the air.
over the birds of the air,
And over the cattle.
and over the cattle,
And over all the earth.
and over all the earth,
And over every creeping thing.
and over every creeping thing. Now, who is to have dominion?
Us.
Who?
Man.
Man. Notice who has dominion. Man, and not God. You and not him. We'll talk about that. But you need to understand that's very critical in understanding each one of our purpose that God has actually created us with in His Word. So we are created in His image and in His likeness, and then we were given dominion to rule. That's God's original intent and His end result that He had when He first created us. And now notice also very carefully, we're reading in Genesis chapter 1 here. Now, at this particular point, man was created. But the question that we want to be sure to make note of, man is created in Genesis chapter 1, but he was not yet formed into Genesis chapter 2. In other words, God created us spirit in Genesis 1, 26, 27. And then in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, he comes along and says, from the dust of the ground, he formed man and breathed into his nostrils, that man became a living soul. But the point we want to make sure that everybody sees here is, man was created before he was formed. Which means we, you, and I were finished before we were started. Now here is the thing that we need to establish as we go into chapter 1 and be able to fully comprehend what it is that the author is really writing here. What we need to know is this. God didn't get us born to get us finished. Okay? He didn't get us born to get us finished. He finished us first in spirit. We just got to read it. And then we were born. Therefore, our daily life is no more than coming into an encounter of what He has already finished. Let me illustrate this. Anybody identify what this is? That's an iPhone. That's an iPhone box. My iPhone that I have in my hand, this is the box that it came in. Apple does such a great job in packaging, you would wonder why I still hold the box. It's too nice to even throw away. So, how many got Apple products and you still got the box? they do such a good job that I didn't even want to throw the box away. And so, but this is an Apple product. But what you got to understand, in order to understand this principle here, all you simply got to do is to understand what happens in the creation of not only the iPhone, but also any other product that you typically buy. In other words, before this reached the end user in my hand, this particular product had already, when it reached my hand, it was already complete, finished, tried and tested before I ever received it.
Yep.
They didn't come up with Steve Jobs, the way this doesn't work. They don't put this in your hand and then later come along and provide the functions or try to figure out how it is supposed to be used.
No.
Okay. Matter of fact, when you buy this particular product or any other product as far as that is concerned, all of the things, all of the capacities of this has already been completed before it even reaches you. And when it's completed, here's the significant thing that happens, is that on this particular product, notice they put a symbol. And the symbol is called an image. Okay? And the image represents the creator of that particular product. It represents it. And in the process of creating it, what happens is the creator of this product decides on what the purpose and what the function and what the capacity of this product will be. And so when I got this box, I automatically knew that this phone could do certain things.
Yep.
I knew it could take phone calls. I knew it had the capacity to do text messaging. I knew it had the capacity to also record and film. I knew it also had the capacity it also had the capacity to have, it has a calculator. It has note-taking features on it. And guess what? It has all other type of features that I very seldom use.
Yeah.
And before it leaves the manufacturing facility, it has already been tested to do all of the things that I just mentioned. And there's no question about whether or not it has or can function in that capacity. It was finished before it arrived. Stamped. Oh, micro. It was finished before it arrived. Stamped with an image of its creator. You can look at your Microsoft products, it has a little image on it. The car you drive, Mercedes-Benz, it comes with an image. And the image represents the creator that actually created it. And when you pick up your car off the lot and drive it off the lot, there's no question in your mind about what that particular vehicle will do or have the capacity to do. Matter of fact, you often wonder when you get in your car if you notice the speedometer in your car. How many of us notice the speedometer in your car? Sister Veneer, how fast is your car? How fast does the speedometer say that your car will go? You have no idea? Anybody notice Sister Thomas?
120.
Okay, 120. She got 120. My question to us then is, do you ever drive 120?
No.
You don't drive 120. Okay, you don't drive 120, but it has the capacity of driving. How does the manufacturer of that car know that it will drive 120?
Well, we suppose they tried it.
Huh?
They tested it.
All right. It's been tested. It's been tested before you purchase the car. The point I'm making is, it's important for us to understand when we talk about understanding our true identity, that we need to, when we understand and embrace the notion of being created in the image and likeness of God, it's with the understanding of knowing that when we showed up, God has already finished us. And when we were born, God knew and knows what we were born to do and how and the capacity by which He has created us. Let me give you some examples. Let me give you a Bible example. Y'all remember Jeremiah? You remember when he was born or before he was born? Remember Jeremiah chapter 1? God came to Jeremiah, and Jeremiah he began to reveal to Jeremiah what his purpose was for here on earth. And he told Jeremiah, and Jeremiah began to back up or try to backtrack from the purpose that God called him to. Jeremiah chapter 1, verse number 10. God told Jeremiah that he was going to be a prophet to the nations. And Jeremiah began to actually not embrace that particular purpose. And God told Jeremiah very quickly, Jeremiah, I knew thee before you were knitted in your mother's womb, and I have called you to be a prophet to all of the nations. Your purpose was finished before you came, Jeremiah. That's the point that he's making to Jeremiah. Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. And before you came forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee. And I ordained thee a prophet. When did it happen? It happened, everybody said before. Your purpose was created in you before. You are finished right now. You are finished right now. Just like this iPhone, just like your car. Before God released you into the world, before He sent you to the retail store of your mother's womb, He created you with all the functions and the capabilities that you would need to fulfill the purpose that He created you for. But the problem is that we begin to discuss is this. We've been looking. We started out by examining the story that the author introduces to us in the book of the eagle and the chicken. Y'all remember? And we looked at and began to expound upon that eagle-chicken story, and we learned there are three different aspects, and we're going to be continuing to build on this eagle-chicken story. So we're going to be referring to this story throughout the entire study of our book. We looked at three video vignettes. One vignette had to do with the eagle-chicken story itself, and we learned from that vignette it talks about the plight of the eagle. Then we looked at another vignette of the eagle story, and it referred to the potential of the eagle. And then we lastly looked at another vignette which got into more of the idea of the purpose of the eagle. Now, I want to end today we're talking about leaving us with this idea, because this will be the biggest idea that we will continue to lay foundationally and build upon from this point on. When we look at really not understanding ourselves, being created in the image and the likeness of God, we can learn a lot from the eagle who saw himself as a chicken. Because many of us, like that eagle, find ourselves not seeing ourselves created in the image and the likeness of God who created us, but we see ourselves actually reflecting more of a mentality of the chicken. And we discussed on Wednesday night in a little detail, when we look at the plight of the eagle in that first vignette, what was the biggest plight that we discovered in terms of that the eagle had?
Mistaken identity.
His mistaken identity. His mistaken identity. Our identity, until we come to fully understand our true identity, and when we talk about discovering God's purpose as God's love bank, it is for the purpose of more than nothing else than to help us to see our real true identity. So that's why we say we are God's love bank. Now, here is how important understanding your identity is, and here is how we all struggle. Every person in this room really struggles with a true sense of self-identity, understanding who we are. For instance, some of us today have shown up in this room today not knowing really who you are. Let me give you an example. There's some of us who, ain't no Michael Jordans on in the room today, right? Okay. And we wear Michael Jordans. And did you not know when you wear Michael Jordan, you wear a person? You wear Liz Claiborne's, and you're wearing a person. You're not wearing yourself, but you're wearing a person. You wear Pierre Cardin's, you're wearing a person. You have a fashion industry who has capitalized and still capitalized, making multi-million dollars worth of money because of people not really understanding who they really are. Grappling with the hard question of who am I? And when you don't realize who you are, what you do, you find yourself trying to be someone other than you are. And many of us in this room, it's hard to get to know you because you have really failed to get to know yourself. And so we see ourselves grappling with going to the mirror in some cases, seeing what's reflected back, and hating what we see. An identity problem. And so next week, after we meet on Wednesday, we're going to really, really look at these two concepts that we just introduced today. In chapter 1, the author goes on to talk about one of the greatest needs of all humankind is to live a life of fulfillment. That's the greatest driver of all of us, to be fulfilled in the life that we're living. And if a life of fulfillment cannot be lived as long as you don't know who you are. And here's the problem with that too. And the reason that we don't know who we are, we haven't really addressed with clarity the answers to these other questions. The reason that you don't know who you are is because you don't really understand where you're from. That's why we started in Genesis chapter 1, but we're going to go back there. You don't know what your source is. You know, one of the greatest trends right now that we see happening, y'all notice all the DNA, Ancestry.com and that kind of thing. You know why it's so popular right now? Because people are grappling with this question, where am I from? I mean, who am I and where am I from? And it's a big multi-million-dollar industry because of this question of the heart. And the thing about it is, if you don't know who you are and where you're from, you won't be able to answer this all-important question is, what is my purpose? That's why you can't answer this question, of what is my purpose, until you've gotten clarity on those other two questions. Who am I and where am I from? Okay? And so, I'm excited about going forward with this study. Any questions about anything that we've said? One other thing we want to make sure, I think we've collected all of the email addresses at this point. And when we come into class on Wednesday, we want everyone to actually, as you come in, let's come into your breakout groups on Wednesday, okay? If everybody, when we come into our class, come into our breakout, the groups that you were assigned in on Wednesday. Without any, Brother Bailey, do we need to touch on anything? Okay. I'm going to ask that Brother Osborne, being that you have that mic in front of me, if you lead us in a dismissal prayer.
Let's pray. Most righteous Heavenly Father, Lord God, we come to you at this moment, thanking you for creating us and finishing us before we even started. Father, help us to walk with that understanding, that we are already in the place where we need to be, and it's up to us to find what you have called us to be, to fulfill what you've created us for. Father, we ask that as we continue to go through this class, that you provide understanding, that you provide frustrations at times for us to grow, for us to get out of our comfort zone and really find out what you have called us to be. Help us all be eagles like you've called us, and get out of the chicken shack that many of us sometimes live in and put ourselves in. Father, we ask you to